and this is awesome because I actually know some of the people who showed up today, which is really awesome. But I'm sure we'll have chances to meet everybody else over the course of all right now and later as well. And I sort of want to say up front that if you are here for the silver bullet for growth, you will be sorely disappointed. This is not the talk for that, primarily because there are no silver bullets for growth. But if there is one, it's likely the process for how you learn about what works and what doesn't work for you and your product. And what we'll go through today is the bit that you absolutely need to have figured out for anything else you do for growth, to have any sort of meaningful impact and for you to even have odds of sustainable growth. And I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. And so that's why we decided to start off this Growth Nation series with the introduction of the idea of the North Star metric. And you'll see over the course of this entire workshop why this is so important and how some of the world's fastest growing companies have used this notion to supercharge their growth as well. And we will have a few polls, just to get people's ideas and sort of to level set everybody on what good North Star metrics might even be. So this will be reasonably interactive. And at the end of this, we'll have a workshop where everybody who's here will get broken up into mini teams, and you'll get a chance to play growth team for a couple of well-known companies and see if you can figure out ways to make them grow as well. Okay. So let's dive in, right? And these sorts of questions are the most common ones that I get, or the most common kind of questions that a lot of teams are sort of struggling with and trying to answer, right? Is because ultimately you want to know if whatever you're doing has an impact. And that impact isn't, I launched a campaign or, I got a particular piece of blog content out. It's ultimately, how did this impact the growth of this company or this product? And normally you get these sorts of questions, from marketing teams for the most part. But from the product teams, you generally also, tend to have a little bit of nebulousness because product teams are focused a lot on, I'm just going to put features out the door, but, is there really a clear crystal cut understanding of how do any of these features impact how the product grows? And ultimately, what's the ROI on all of this work for everybody? And generally, people tend to get tied down in their own departmental metrics. So product might care about the number of features they put out, or the engineering team might care about how many bugs they quashed, and the customer success team cares about how many sort of what the call volume was and how quickly those got resolved, and marketing team cares about MQLs, and all of those are important. But all of those should be in the service of the customer. And it's because we have this issue across teams that people are so focused on their own metrics that sometimes organizations as a whole tend to lose focus on, what does the customer really care about? And that's where the power of the North Star metric tends to shine through, right? And so, very simply, a North Star metric is that one number that quantifies the value your product delivers. And whenever I've asked this question of execs in teams or founders, more often than not, I get really blank stares because nobody's asked them the question that way, as to how do you measure the value your product delivers? And I tend to get a couple kinds of answers. So I want to test that out here as well. And so that's really what our first poll will be about. So you thought you'd have to sit and listen for a while, but this is going to get interactive really quickly. So you're going to see a poll which Steph is going to launch. And I'm interested in seeing what the group here thinks.
I have just launched the poll. I'm going to give you guys like 30 seconds to submit your answer. And then I do a countdown because like who doesn't like some pressure? It mixes it up.
Yeah.
Awesome, guys. A couple more seconds left, so make sure you submit those answers. Polls are closing in 3, 2, and 1. All right, and I am going to share results right now. So Anuj, you should be able to see those results.
Yeah, so this is not entirely surprising as to what I see. I tend to get the first two options are ones that are almost always the common ones that I see is people say, hey, we're making money, right? Isn't that a measure of value? And hey, we have users, isn't that a measure of value? And the something else can be many, many things. But whenever I've dug a little deeper into this, I think I found maybe 10 to 20% of the time that something else really is the right something else. And so, Steph, if you can close this. So the answer really is it's something else, and it's not revenue, and it is a variation of revenue in some very small exceptions, and I'll go into why it's not revenue in a second, because revenue, just because you made money off of somebody doesn't mean you delivered value. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have a few subscriptions I should cancel, and I'm just being a lazy bum about. I mean, I've downloaded apps I have sort of paid for, but haven't quite really used a lot of. And so, that's sort of your first signal is just because somebody bought something doesn't mean they used it. And if they didn't use it, they didn't really get value out of it. The second bit is that revenue is really a function of the value you deliver, right? Because people aren't idiots. And if they don't find something valuable, other than people like me who pay for a few things that they really shouldn't be, but under normal circumstances, only if you continually deliver value would somebody even consider paying for it. And it's only when somebody chooses to keep paying for something is when you have a sustainable business, right? But that choice to keep paying for it is a function of value delivered. And the third thing, and this is something marketing teams see a lot of, is revenue is really easily influenced by external factors. I mean, and a really easy example of this is e-commerce companies, where there's so much seasonality built in. Right? Almost all of the year's revenue gets made up for, during Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Christmas time. It's not like you're not making money for the rest of the year, but it's sort of peanuts compared to what you do during that time frame. Or if you were to just run these one-time influencer campaigns, or if you were to promote certain discounts, all of that tends to have an impact. So if you just looked at how much money you were making, you really wouldn't be able to tell, like, is this sustainable or not? And so just trying to look at choppy revenue graphs and numbers is not something that's going to indicate whether people are really getting value or not. And that's why you need something else, which is the North Star metric, to give you a much better indication of the health of your growth. And there are certain key characteristics of what this number that you ultimately focus on tend to have. And this is true across businesses, no matter what North Star metric it is and what product it is. Right. So first thing you already know, right? It has to quantify the value delivered. And value is a function of use. And there are some exceptions to this, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So if you have that question, just hold on. The second is that it has to be representative of your product strategy, right? And what I mean by that is, like, if you're Uber, for example, I mean, their North Star metric has to do with rides taken. Otherwise, they're measuring something else, because the way Uber delivers value is when people actually take a ride, right? So it has to align very closely with what your product is really about, right? Because that's the only way you can even start to measure use. And the last thing is that because you're measuring it as use, it is by definition, a leading indicator of revenue, where with revenue, it's almost always a lagging indicator. It's too late. So if you have a leading indicator, you can be much more agile about responding to opportunities or problems that arise with your growth, than if you were waiting to see, okay, how much money did we make, right? Because it's also not always the case that you make money as soon as you make the sale in many cases. And so generally, every product delivers value in its own way, right? And this should be obvious. And I'll show you a couple of examples of what this means, and then we'll get into some more exercises to get everybody's brains thinking in the way all of these companies have thought about their growth as well, right? So take the example of Google. All of us use Google, right? And the way Google is focused on growth is that the number they are focused on is the number of searches, right? And there are all these other numbers, right? Whether it's searches done in different countries, how many times a day people search, all of those are important, but those are all a subset of this one big number that they care about. Because if the number of searches goes up, by definition, that means you get served up more search results, which means you get more value out of using their system. If more search results get served up, that means advertisers have an avenue to serve up ads to you, and 90-something% of Google's revenue is from ad revenue, right? So it's very closely tied, to their revenue model, which is a characteristic of Nordstrom metrics. It is all about use because it is about number of searches, and it's a win-win across the board, right? You get value, the advertisers get value, Google gets value, right? So it's a true win-win metric across the board for everybody. Right? And just another slightly different example to get you to think about it is Airbnb, right? Sort of suffering right now because of COVID, but in normal circumstances, the number they're focused on is the number of nights stayed, right? Because that is how they deliver value to you. Because if you don't stay, there is no business model for Airbnb. They're done, right? And if more people aren't clamoring to stay more nights, they will never be able to bring more hosts onto their platform as well, right? So even from the host perspective, the way they make money is if more people stay more nights, right? And clearly, if more people stay more nights, the hosts make money, and as a consequence, Airbnb makes money as well, right? So if they just focus on this one number, that cures pretty much every growth problem they have. Now, there are different ways to tackle this, and that's part of the exercise you all are going to go through in a bit, right? But ultimately, every action they take is looked at through this lens: is how is everything we do helping move the needle on our North Star metric, right? Now, one way to help figure out, what your North Star metric even should be, because many people have not figured it out, or you may want to even develop your hypothesis for it, is that every product, for the most part, with some very few exceptions, tend to fall into one of these buckets in terms of their engagement model, right? And I like to remember it as the acronym of TAP, right? That's transaction, attention, and productivity. And as the name suggests, right? So, and I'll show you examples of each of these in just a bit, and those are going to be exercises for you all as well. But a transactional engagement model simply is like, I get value as a function of, I paid for something, I got something in return, and that me getting something in return is how I got value out of it. Attention is literally, you want my time, right? I have to watch something, I have to listen to something. If all Steph was doing was hosting virtual events, right? This, her North Star metric would be around attention, right? Because she wants more people to attend more of her virtual events. Right? And productivity is just things that make things faster for us, more efficient for us. And we all use products like this in our life. Google, for example, right? I mean, Google is a productivity tool for us, right? Because that's why their North Star metric is the number of searches. Right? Because if it wasn't as useful, you wouldn't use it as much. Right? Or, it's not as obvious, but Airbnb itself is a productivity tool, right? Because it's just making it easier to find more places to stay. Right? You get value from staying, not because you paid to stay at Airbnb. Right? So, and this will become clearer in a few seconds as well, because you are all going to start doing some polls on each of these with some pretty famous companies to help you understand this concept some more. Right, so let's tackle transaction first, right? And so we have everybody should know these companies, right? So let's try and figure out what these North Star metrics are, right? So there's a poll for this. So let's do Walmart first.
All right, I just launched the poll. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to read and kind of think about what the best answer is. All right, guys, a few more seconds, so make sure you got those votes in. We're going to close the poll in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, sharing the results, so you guys should all be able to see what people voted.
All right. So, clearly, there were some false answers in here, but the correct answer in this case is the number of purchases completed. All the other numbers, right? The average order volume, the number of repeat purchases, and the revenue per store, they're a subset of the number of purchases completed, right? It's only if you get a purchase can you even think about how do I increase the order volume for a given purchase? Or if I don't have that first purchase, there's no way I get a repeat purchase, right? I think of the dynamic being the same thing with Uber or with Airbnb. If I don't get the first stay, there's no way I get a repeat stay, right? And whether it's a first purchase or a repeat purchase, as long as the number of purchases are going up, that's what matters. It's a secondary question as to how do you segment that in terms of, was it a first-time customer or was it a repeat customer, and how do I treat those differently? Okay? And it's the same thing with revenue per store, right? Is if they're going up as a whole, that's when you can segment to say, okay, which stores are performing better than others? What do I need to do on a store-by-store basis? But if as a whole the number of purchases aren't going up, Walmart has a problem, right? So let's close this one and let's try it for Amazon. And I will preface this with, this is a trick question. And,
not surprised about that.
and I will say, think about Amazon really from the perspective of, e-commerce and buying stuff.
All right, guys, we're going to keep these open for a few more seconds. I'm going to count down like usual in 3, 2, and 1. All right, we're closing the poll here. Perfect. I'm going to share the results. Here you go.
See, I had so many people fall into my trick question trap. So the people who picked the number of purchases completed, you're not entirely wrong. That's what it used to be. It's evolved over time, but you can see the dynamic is sort of the same. If you don't have first purchases, you don't really have repeat purchases, right? And clearly a number of books. They used to be a book company, but even when they were just a book company, all they really cared about was the number of purchases. They didn't care whether you had 1 book in the order or you had 1,000 books in the order. They just wanted the number of orders going up. What they have started to pivot to is this number of purchases per Prime subscriber. I'll bring this up here. I'll tell you why. Is because as a whole, Amazon's customer base currently, I want to say it's something like 62 or 63% of Amazon's customer base are Prime subscribers. And Prime subscribers purchase at almost 5 times the rate as non-Prime subscribers. So Amazon genuinely doesn't care as much about non-Prime. They want the whole world to be on Prime. And then that number is just going to go up as they expand more and more internationally. Right? And so what this is, and the reason I said this was a trick question was, it's not abnormal for North Star metrics to evolve over time. And you'll see a couple more examples of this as we go on, right? Because sometimes your product just becomes more complex or just has more offerings, and you have to really take a step back and look at does the North Star metric still highly represent the value we deliver, and does it truly represent our product strategy? And so they're moving towards this whole idea of Prime subscribers because that's where their product strategy is moving to. They just want the whole world there. Right? It's also a trick question because Amazon, is more than just e-commerce. Right? So the other big money spinner for Amazon is, Amazon Web Services. And clearly, the number of purchases from Prime subscribers makes zero sense if you think about Amazon Web Services, right? Because it has nothing to do with that. And so Amazon Web Services would have its own North Star metric because it is truly a completely separate product, right? And so I wanted to sort of re-emphasize this point that North Star metrics are not company specific, they're product specific. It just so happens that when most companies start out, there's just one product. So the company and the product North Star metric tend to be synonymous for a while. Right. All right, let's try attention. And everybody should know these. I don't know. I mean, every night has become the movie night for me. So I'm like, Netflix is my thing now. Right. So let's give Facebook a go and let's see what people think there.
All right, guys. I'm gonna give you like 20 more seconds. I'm trying to guess if I know this one too. With the amount of time I spend on Facebook, I should know this.
Yeah.
All right, guys, a few more seconds. For 3, 2, and 1. Sharing the results.
Oh, all right. So the correct answer here, and I'll admit this was a bit of a trick question as well, because Facebook is a very interesting sort of North Star metric that they have. So their North Star metric is actually daily active users. But what they've done is they have a very good idea of what active means in their app, right? So just because you signed up for Facebook doesn't mean you got value out of Facebook. I could just sign up or I could even log in, but if I didn't do anything, I didn't get value, right? So that is not part of their definition of active, but their definition of active actually takes into account all sorts of creating and consuming actions. So even if you spent an hour just flicking through your feed, the fact that you scrolled through your feed is considered active because it's an attention game that they're playing, right? So you're literally choosing them over Netflix at that point, and that's what they want. And so they have a number of actions. So things like, if you did any combination of sharing something, liking something, posting something, using Messenger, joining a group, whatever it is, right? So they've got these 8 or 10 things that make up their definition of active. And that's the lens through which they look at it, is that if every user does any one or more of these actions in any combination every day, they're active. And that's why they are, I don't know about you, but like the amount of Facebook notifications I get are crazy, right? Because they're trying to prompt you into activity as a function of those notifications. Right? And Facebook's North Star metric also evolved. And I was lucky enough to sit in on a fireside chat with the first head of growth at Facebook, who actually lives in Cambridge. And he said that when they first started out, they believed that weekly active users was their North Star metric because they thought weekly was, quite a bit of time to be spending on something, but clearly people glommed onto this thing and they found that, weekly was too long of a period for them to be able to be agile about the decisions they could make, but where their opportunities really lie. And so they moved very quickly from weekly to daily active users. So even though the fundamental North Star metric, is the same, it's the frequency with which they measure it has changed, and that's something that can happen as the North Star metrics evolve, as if you're playing the attention game as well. And I mean, who knows, during COVID, maybe it's become hourly active users, who knows, right? But it's reasonably common for companies to have these aggregate sort of Facebook style North Star metrics, where you've got to literally sum up multiple numbers into one to start making sense of your growth, right? So let's give Netflix a go.
All right, just launch the polling. All right, guys, I'm going to give you guys like 10 more seconds to submit your answers here. So a few more. So 3, 2, and 1. All right, share results. There we go.
Ah, look at this. We're getting better already. This is great. Right. So the first one of number of subscribers, right? That's the same dynamic as having signed up for something. Just because I subscribe to Netflix doesn't mean I watch Netflix, right? So remember, North Star metrics are a function of use, right? And they have to capture use. And because it has to be tied closely to the revenue model and the business model, right? And their business model literally is all about subscribers. So while number of subscribers is incomplete, it's what do they do, right? And the reason this is sort of a generic metric for them, where it's number of subscribers watching N hours per month, that itself changes for them a lot, because they keep a very close sort of track on why do people unsubscribe, and it's almost always I didn't watch enough, right? And so they have a cutoff which is not public, or keeps changing, of number of subscribers who watch at least a certain amount of content a month, because that's what predicts a retained user for them, and what will keep people subscribing month over month, right? Because this is ultimately about finding what leads to sustainable growth. So sometimes your North Star metrics can get pretty granular, just because there is this one specific action or cumulative actions that are more predictive of value than anything else. Right? And of course, the last one, the number of videos added, that's the sort of the same dynamic as, let's say, shopping online. It's just because I added something to my cart doesn't mean I bought it, right? I mean, Lord knows, I've left so many carts. I mean, I do that more to get the email that says, hey, we're going to give you a discount, please come back and buy. But just because you added something to a watch list doesn't mean you watched it, right? So for them, it's absolutely a function of not only watching, but a certain minimal number of watching as well. And again, all of these things, sometimes they start off more generic. So they might have started off with number of subscribers who watch at least one movie a week, or just number of subscribers who watch videos. They might have literally just started off, but you can start to get more granular and hone in over time as you discover more and more about the characteristics of why are people sticking around and why are people leaving, right? So it's the rare case where you'll have your North Star metric completely nailed down day one. It's very likely it might evolve over time. All right. And so just in case you're taking notes, so that's what we said there. And the last one, right? So that's our productivity. So I don't know how many of you have been exposed to Salesforce. It's very powerful with what it does. So even if you haven't, what Salesforce is it's a customer relationship management tool. So it's a way salespeople manage their sort of sales pipelines. It's also a way for marketers to then keep whoever is a customer engaged, and they also provide tools for customer success, so support, that sort of stuff. So it's a way to completely manage the relationship from before you become a customer, while you're a customer, and keeping you retained. Right. So with that background, right, let's let's launch the Salesforce poll and see what people think.
Oh, yes.
And,
all right, it is launched. For this, is it Salesforce's North metric, like kind of keeping tabs with the contacts that everyone's been adding, or?
We'll find out, I guess.
Okay. No, I guess I'm just trying to, yeah. All right, guys, we have like 10 more seconds, so I'm going to close the poll. So 3, 2, and 1. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. All right, there's still a few more people. Okay, we're done. I gave you a few extra seconds. All right, there we go.
Right. Okay, so here too, like, for the first one, which is the number of contacts added, that's the same thing as number of subscribers or adding a video to a watch list, right? Is just because I have people added to my database doesn't mean anything really happened. It's like I have to interact with them in a certain way. I have to manage that relationship with them in a certain way to get value. Otherwise, otherwise, really all I have is the equivalent of an Excel sheet with people's names and emails in there, right? In which case, I might as well use Excel or Sheets. I don't need something like Salesforce to manage my relationship with people, right? And I know the second and third one were sort of tricky. I'll get to that in just a second. But the reason it's not number of deals closed is because a deal closing is is a customer saying, yes, I'm going to sign a contract with you, or and so so just because that happened doesn't mean that you got value out of Salesforce. That just means that, in fact, if anything, that's a reflection of the value somebody saw in your product to say, I'm going to buy your product, right? And so because Salesforce is this tool to help you manage your interactions with the people in your database, which the official term is contacts, right? What they truly care about is that you engage with your interactions, or with your contacts. And so what they want is the number of interactions as a whole going up, right? They don't care about, are you interacting with every contact in your database or not? You will start to see value as you interact. And as you interact, you will automatically start to think about, how do I then engage everybody who's in my database? Because you're paying for Salesforce on a per contact basis. That's how customer relationship management tools make their money, right? And that's why they get super expensive, because as you add more people, it starts to cost. And so if you're going to start to get an ROI on that cost, you need to make sure you're interacting and engaging, as much as possible, with your database. So it's not as much about the number of interactions with each contact, but as a whole, is that going up? And the number of interactions per contact is like a subset of your total number of interactions that you have with your contacts, right? But even with Salesforce, it's very likely, and I'm making an assumption here, is that when they would have started out, they would have started out with number of contacts added, because when they first started out, they weren't really, as powerful a tool as they are today. But it was the first time you had a systematic way of managing all the people who were engaging with your business, versus something like Sheets or whatever. So, all right, let's let that one go, and let's try Asana. And if you've never used Asana, it's basically a sort of, like a project management-ish tool. Trello is an alternative. To-do lists are alternatives.
I like Trello a lot more. I'm super biased.
Yeah, there are people on, it's literally a divide.
I know. Yeah. I'm like on Team Trello. All right, guys, a couple more seconds. What?
This is also why Asana copied Trello's sort of, list feature to get people like you over.
All right, guys, closing the polls here in 3, 2, and 1. All right, we're going to end, and then I'm sharing the results.
All right. So here too, this one was a trick question as well, I'll admit. And so, Asana, you can manage projects in all sorts of ways, right? You can log tasks, you can assign tasks, you can assign due dates, you can create timelines. There's all sorts of funky stuff you can do in there. So it's not just about the tasks, logged themselves, or the number of task boards you created. Because again, just because you created a task board doesn't mean you did anything. That's almost like creating a shell. That's like adding a video to a watch list sort of thing. And just because you completed a task, that's like an incomplete measure of the kinds of value you can get out of Trello in like measuring or checking off that you've got a task done. So just like with Facebook, there's so many different ways to help you manage your projects that they too have taken this approach of active users. Now, what is different between them and Facebook is that because there's so many different use cases, and they have no way to predict what kind of project people will want to manage and what sorts of timelines people will have and how many people will be engaging with any one board. So just because they have that level of just unknowingness of how people are going to use this and with what frequency, that's why their North Star metric doesn't have that frequency component that Facebook does. But what they do care about is, are more people in the system and are more people using the system in A, B, C, D, E ways, just like Facebook? Right? Because that is the measure of, that's the closest measure of value for them, because they can't take advantage of this frequency thing. And this is true of a lot of businesses as well, is there really is no specific frequency sometimes. And this gets even worse, with high ticket value items, right? Like think of buying cars or buying insurance or homes. Like how many times in your life do you do that, right? And so when you have extreme low frequency, or unknown frequency, you can't have that as part of your North Star metric. You've got to rely on something else, right? And so the key message here is sometimes you may not have the most perfect exact North Star metric. You might have to go with like the nearest proxy for it, right? And I want to give you like a radically different example of finding a proxy for it as well. And this is true a lot in e-commerce, and even though that's not here and that's not productivity, but that just struck me, right? So I'm going to show you this, right? So our company sells these mugs, right? And I'm not plugging them, but when you buy these, right, we have no way of telling, did you use them? Did they, when you pull them out of the box, did they just crash and that's it, right? And so we ourselves have to come up with a proxy metric because we don't have a direct way of measuring value, because clearly all products aren't online, right? And this might be similar to even like Walmart, right, where they're looking at number of purchases. And so for us, our North Star metric is the number of weekly orders, because daily there's too much variation every day currently, so we don't know. Like some people buy more on weekends, that sort of thing. But because we currently have no way of measuring are you actually using it and what frequency you're using it with, we have to fall all the way back to the nearest thing to predict that if weekly orders are going up, then that's a reflection of more people are finding out about it, and more people think this is a good thing to buy, right? And that's just reality. All right. So three models of engagement, right? Transaction, attention, productivity. Remember TAP. You'll never forget this. All right. And so just to have these on here for you as reference points. And right, so this is all great, right? So you have a North Star metric, and that's sort of the next logical question is, okay, so how do I, what do I do to grow this number? And if you've never seen this, what you're seeing on your screen is a very simplistic reflection of a customer journey. And this is a customer journey that applies to pretty much any product. This is popularly referred to as the pirate metrics. And it's called the pirate metrics because the acronym is R, right? Because it's acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. So R. So if you have marketing people and growth people randomly screaming, what's the R? This is what they're really talking about. And very simply, right? I mean, you think of this for your business. Think of this for Startup Boston, like even for us, right? People have to find you first, right? And if they find you, like they should have a great first experience, because I mean, let's face it, in this day and age, we're pretty sort of not patient with things. So if there's no great first experience, there is no second experience, you're done. And if they do have a great first experience, then so what brings them back, right? And brings them back could be, if you're an online product, what's the frequency of use, right? What's the daily use? What's the weekly use? Or in the case of our product, it's like, how do we get them to buy again, right? That's them coming back, right? How do you make money? And depending on the product, revenue and retention could be interchangeable. Like for us, you have to buy first before you will buy again. So, revenue comes before retention. And, if they like the product, then, do they tell their friends and family about you? And this graph is a little misleading in that, because it's so simplistic, because it's not really a straight line. It's really a loop, because referrals just feed the acquisition loop, right? As to how people find out about you. And, if you had to sort of break this down even further into 3 questions that you had to sort of solve for to understand, where your opportunities for growth may even lie, right? I think the first one, truly is, so, how many of these, people can we even get to engage with us, right? And how do we improve this number? There's a book out there called Traction by Gabriel Weinberg and Justin Maris, where I think they identified, like 19 different traction channels and ways to test your way through identifying which ones could work for you and which ones could work best for you, right? And it's a matter of testing, because nobody really knows when they first start out, like, where are my best customers going to come from, right? And so it's a matter of cycling through not only channels, but then what do you do within each of those channels to find out, what works? Like, are we going to be on Facebook? Great. Like, do we have Facebook groups? Do we do Facebook ads? If we do ads, are they video ads? Are they lead ads? Are they, simple GIF creatives? Like, there's 100 things you can try out to get more people to start to, begin to engage with you. But as we've been learning, right, is just because people show up doesn't mean they use, right? And if they don't use, they won't get value, but you have to solve for this thing first. And so that's sort of the next question, right? Is sort of, what's the depth of their engagement? How deep do they get through that customer journey, right? Do we have a lot of people signing up and dropping off? Do we have a lot of people signing up, showing up the first week, but dropping off after week 1? Do we have a lot of people showing up, going through a free trial all the way through, but don't want to pay, or they pay for a month and then start to drop off, and if they're paying and they're hanging around, why are they not telling everybody about us? They sound like they love us. They're giving us their money month after month. So what's the deal here, right? So it's a matter of trying to understand, where is the biggest drop off in the level of their engagement to figure out, okay, here's a place to maybe focus on. And so the third question, right, is sort of the frequency, right? How often can you get people to engage? Because clearly just one use isn't going to be enough. That's not how you build a sustainable business for anything. Like, us selling 2 mugs to one person, not going to do it. You need to come back, or Facebook people, being a daily active user for 1 day, not enough. How do I make you a repeat daily active user, right? And so depending on where the problem may be, one or more of these questions will help you answer this question of, so, okay, how can we move the needle on our North Star metric, right? And it's a whole separate workshop and talk on, getting really deep into how you set objectives and, how you actually test your way through this. And I think we'll do this at some point in time in the future. The objective for this time was to, focus on the one most important thing without which pretty much all of your sustainable growth activities will falter, which is identifying what a North Star metric might be for you, and being able to, be in a position to ideate for how you can impact this number, right? And this idea of ideation is really important, right? And I was fortunate enough to work for a little bit with Morgan Brown, and he wrote the only other good growth book out there, which is Hacking Growth. And he used to always say this, that without ideas to test, you have nothing, because without ideas, all you have are opinions. And opinions mean nothing. We've got to be really dispassionate, and really informed by data about how we approach growth, where we tackle growth within that customer journey that you just saw, and what we learn and how fast we learn from all of the ideas that we test out. And I just realized I should have put this slide in, because this is a great analogy to think about sort of ideation and testing. It's a lot like playing Battleship. So we've all played the game, and if we weren't cheating, what you do in Battleship is you throw your ping out, right? And let's say you hit A5 and you didn't get a hit on A5. You learned something. There's no ship there, right? And so you'd probably take a swing and maybe throw J9. And if you got a hit there, right, you've got your first signal, oh, there's a ship there. You probably wouldn't throw your next ping on A6, right? Because there's no ship there. You'd probably throw J8 or something around J9 for you to understand more about where is the ship and how fast can I blow it up, right? And so testing for growth is literally like that. It's like playing Battleship, where you look for this one signal, and once you find it, you double down on it, right? But the only way you can start to double down it is by having a lot of ideas that you can test. And as you test, you get even more ideas based on what you've just learned about what works and what doesn't, right? And I want you to just start thinking a little bit about how to think about ideas, because that's what's going to inform the sort of group exercise that's going to happen in just a little bit, right? And so when we talk about ideas, we're really talking about testable ideas. And when we talk about testable ideas, what we're talking about is hypotheses. And this shouldn't be a scary word for you, because we've all done this in chem lab in school, right? We all had aims and hypotheses and methods and observations and results and conclusions. This is no different. This is that same hypothesis we learned in school, right? So by definition, a hypothesis has to be testable, right? And it has to address some sort of conversion barrier. And what I mean by conversion barrier is something that's preventing somebody going deeper through those levels of engagement they can with your product. And at the end of the day, you have to learn something, right? And so what that means is you have to construct the hypothesis in a way that you can actually learn something from it. It's not just about, I'm just going to try this, let's see what happens. That's not a good hypothesis. So what is, right, is, and very simply put, many people will do this, have different formats for constructing hypotheses, but, and I'm showing you this just to orient your thinking at this point in time, right? Is if we just do X differently, we expect to see a change. We expect to see something else. And we'll measure it in a certain way. And if your hypothesis is missing any of these components, it is not going to be testable. You will not get insights from it. You won't be able to learn what you really need to learn.